The brutal act of violence is clearly a gross display of what ISIS is capable of, what they're motivated about, and what they are really all about. And I think this act of mass murder amounts to a religious war. Now, we all have our own interpretations at this point. This continues to go on. At this point, these people were targeted, as I see it, and murdered because of their faith.
MSNBC host Ed Schultz saying we're in a religious war with ISIS. As that offered to us as a pretext, let's now bring in our panel. Josh Orton, former aide to Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, who Skypes in from Madison, Wisconsin, and Steve Deace, who's joining us via Skype from Des Moines, Iowa. Steve is the author of the book Rules for Patriots: How Conservatives Can Win Again. So, Josh, you got Ed Schultz, who speaks very loudly about partisan issues, and he said it's a religious war. Meantime, the White House issues a statement about the beheading of 21 Coptic Christians, referring to them as Egyptian citizens. Will this White House ever join the terms Islamic and terrorism together?
Well, I think there's no doubt that it's terrorism. Look, my friend Ed Schultz usually has a lot of interesting points, but I wouldn't necessarily call him a religious scholar. I think that the White House has smartly avoided some of the more bombastic terms here, and I think that I'm a little actually sort of curious why conservatives have been so angry at the White House for not using the more bombastic sort of religious terminology. I think that it's not something that's necessarily productive here. I don't think Obama saying magic words is going to summon, the Power Rangers or something like that. I think that this is about a deliberate strategy. This isn't about some interesting lexicon.
What about that, Steve? Is it mere bombast to call it Islamic terror?
I think what Americans, regardless of political persuasion, as I stand today in solidarity, JD, with Ed Schultz, I think what Americans want to see is that we have the moral clarity from our leaders to understand who our enemy is, what is motivating them, because that is an indicator that we are willing to do, therefore, what it will take to defeat them. And if you want to look for moral clarity on this issue, I would look no further than a Muslim, the leader of Egypt. I think has provided a lot of moral clarity in the last few weeks. A leader, by the way, that this president didn't want to support. He wanted to support the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt instead. Or another Muslim, like the King of Jordan, for example, who took up arms literally in defense of his own people for what the Islamic State did to him and his countrymen and his subjects there in the Kingdom of Jordan. So I think those are examples of how intelligent people can draw distinctions while at the same time calling evil what it is. Frankly, it is becoming sophomoric and laughable to continue these euphemisms. And when you have Ed Schultz now abandoning ship because we've just lost all moral clarity that not even he can stand on MSNBC and defend, I think that's a pretty good indication that the reach has exceeded the politically correct grasp of this White House.
I guess I would never use Ed Schultz as an indication of any necessarily moral.
I'll make a note of that. Hey, conservatives, make a note of what you just heard. Ed Schultz is not to be taken seriously from the man from Progressives United. We now have it on the record, so the rest of us can stop watching now.
Yes, that's very sophomoric as well. But what I'm saying is that Ed Schultz is not going to be my weather vane when it comes to sort of religious terminology. I guess what I'm saying is that I think that a lot of this, frankly, cynically, is about attacking the president. I think that Congress hasn't been willing to play ball when it comes to fighting ISIS. I think that what you're seeing here is an attack on the commander-in-chief, and I think that conservatives during the Bush administration would not stop talking about how Democrats refused to work with President Bush and how they were undermining the commander-in-chief with frivolous criticism. And I think when the shoe is on the other foot, Republicans have a short-term memory. They're only willing to criticize.
Hey, I was in the Congress of the United States when George W. Bush was right. I stood with him. When he was wrong, I stood against him. And speaking of sophomoric statements, earlier in this segment, Josh, you compared this whole construct to bringing in the Power Rangers. Now, something as serious as religious persecution and people losing their lives.
Sure,
you want to clarify that remark?
Yeah, absolutely. This isn't about, of course, this is a very serious incident. I think that the rise of these sort of hateful incidents, and you see the rise in anti-Semitism especially, is deeply concerning. But I guess what I'm saying is Republicans seem to be laying so much on specific terminology, as if if Obama were to simply use their preferred phrasing, somehow his entire strategy
Well, I tell you what,
change.
when we come back, we'll take a look at the language you think is so circumspect, talk more about it, and get to other topics. Our political panel continues here on America's Forum. Welcome back to America's Forum. Josh Orton on the left, I just want to make sure the language is out there. This is deemed circumspect by Josh. The United States condemns the despicable and cowardly murder of 21 Egyptian citizens in Libya by ISIL-affiliated terrorists. Let's welcome back Josh Orton on the left, Steve Deace on the right. Josh, let me try to point this out to you, and I'll use it in Obama-centric terms. On two occasions, January 20th of years separated in space by 4 years' time, the president's given a speech, but that speech has come following him taking the oath of office in an inaugural ceremony. So the important thing is the president taking the oath of office, not the speech. To simply say these are Egyptian citizens and fail to say they were Coptic Christians beheaded by ISIS strips the event of its intended brutality. Can you see the distinction now, apart from hyperbole?
I actually think that there's two questions here. The first is whether we think that President Obama acknowledges the full gravity of the situation and the brutality and the almost carnal attacks of these groups. And I think the answer is yes. The second question is, why is he choosing not to use the language that conservative talk show hosts and members of the House of Representatives are demanding that he uses? And I think that question rests on whether or not you think the president, what your answer is to the first question. My answer to the first question is yes, of course he understands the gravity of the situation. It is not because he's digging his head in the sand. This is a question of whether or not he wants to engage in a larger thing that he thinks could potentially be a distraction from the actual tactics and the strategy. And I think that what you've seen is fairly convincing arguments that it's not actually going to be productive to engage in the much larger abstract vernacular of a religious war, because this is a very specific thing. And I think Obama has very smartly, as President Bush did during his administration, in pointing out that these attacks do not represent the Muslim religion writ large.
Well, I'll tell you a problem Bush had, if you want to hear a problem, Josh, calling it the war on terror. That's a tactic, not an enemy. But let me give it to Steve Deace. We got a couple of minutes left, Steve. In debate, you accurately define the terms and the participants. These guys just don't want to accurately define the terms?
These guys called the Islamic State, they're not driven by an anti-colonial fervor. They're not driven by land for oil. They are not driven by scarce resources or in a collapsing economy like Putin, so he's invading Ukraine. They are driven by their religion. To claim anything otherwise is frankly insanity.
Again,
and yes, I do question the moral clarity of this president. When he sent last year his Secretary of State on a plane to hand Hamas a $47 million check of taxpayer dollars just as they're lobbying missiles at Israel. When back in 2013, we had to get rid of Assad. We had to go fight next to Al-Qaeda to get rid of Assad. And now we're arming and informing Assad to help us with Islamic State.
What's your point
we sided with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. We sided with the Muslim Brotherhood in Libya. 6 months ago, we called Yemen our great foreign policy success story. We evacuated our embassy there last week. This is total and complete moral confusion, and the language that we are seeing, which also lacks clarity, JD, is simply just fruit, more bitter fruit from the same tree of this failed.
Tell you what, guys, 20 seconds each. Josh, go ahead and respond.
I think it's unfortunate the conservatives have been unwilling to work with the president and instead continue to attack him on his lack of using these grandiose terms that seem inappropriate.
Steve Deace, 20 seconds to you.
I'm not concerned about terminology. I'm concerned about handing
You
Hamas
seem, you
checks.
seem
I'm concerned about
desperate
arming. I'm
concerned with
concerned about
technology.
aiding and abetting the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm more concerned about things like that. You know, the larger abstract questions here, JD.
Well, we can debate the intent of the Islamic State, but it does appear that there is a state of confusion rather than clarity when it comes to the execution of our foreign policy and understanding what's at stake. Josh Orton, as always, we do appreciate your point of view. Steve Deace, we thank you again. Steve Deace has a new book out, Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again. We've had some heavy-duty topics. When we come back, we'll try to take a breather and put a smile on your face with Comedy Corner.